Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations with Father Bosco, a webinar series hosted by the Office of Mission and Ministry and the Georgetown University Alumni Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day to connect virtually with fellow Hoyas for today's conversation, Ignatian Spirituality in the Age of Pandemic with Father Jerry Hayes. Our host, Father Mark Bosco, is Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Georgetown University and holds an appointment in the Department of English. A native of St. Louis, Missouri, Father Bosco joined Georgetown after 14 years at Loyola University, Chicago, where he was a tenured faculty member with a joint appointment in the Departments of Theology and English. From 2012 through 2017, he also served as the director of the Joan and Bill Hank Center for the Catholic Intellectual Heritage at Loyola. As a scholar, Father Bosco has focused much of his work on the intersection of theology and art, specifically the British and American Catholic literary tradition. He has published on a number of authors, including the writers Graham Greene and Flannery O'Connor, and the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar. He is also co-producer and co-director of the film Flannery, which was awarded an NEH grant. I'm Kelly Young, Associate Director of Strategic Engagement and Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few tips and reminders. This conversation is being recorded. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and you will receive the recording link in a follow-up email. Father Bosco and Father Hayes will answer audience questions towards the end of their discussion. Please send in your questions using the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. If you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please also submit those concerns to me via the questions section of the control panel. Without any further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Father Mark Bosco.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. Welcome, Father Jerry, nice to see you. I did want to say, since it was part of the introduction about that Flannery film, we are doing a virtual theatrical release in 51 cinemas this July 17th, this Friday. So if anybody wants to see that film, you can go on our website, flanneryfilm.com, and see the Flannery O'Connor theatrical. Without further ado, though, we're here because of Father Jerry Hayes, who is our Director of Ignatian Programs here at Georgetown University. Father Jerry and I knew each other when we were both out in San Francisco. I was I guess in my last years finishing my doctorate and living at St. Agnes Parish in the Haight-Ashbury, and Father Jerry was just coming in. So we did overlap a little bit there, but it's been wonderful to reconnect these last few years that I've been, now that I'm at Georgetown. Jerry, you grew up in California, and you entered the Society of Jesus after a couple different kind of careers, so a little bit later than out of college, right? Is that right?
True. That's true.
And California province, worked in a lot of work in campus ministry in high schools as well, right?
Correct, yeah. Kairos retreats and yeah.
Very good. So you've been here close to 5 years.
Yep.
Your first year was over at the pastoral care department at Georgetown MedStar Hospital, and now 4 years as this director of Ignatian Programs. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about how you got missioned here and in your work at Georgetown.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. And it's a good story. I continue to reflect on it, especially now these days. I have more time to reflect on how did I get here. But I was doing a period of our formation, our Jesuit formation called tertianship, and I was doing that in Portland, Oregon, and part of that formation, part of that year-long experience. Is to spend time doing something we haven't done ministry-wise in our career, in our time with the Jesuits, and so the invitation came from the then rector of the Jesuit community, Father Joe Lingen, who's a friend of mine, and he said, you know, we've had Jesuits work in the hospital before, and you could come and live with us for 3 months, and it would be a great opportunity. And so I spent 3 months working at the hospital, doing pastoral care, you know, saying mass, anointing, being with patients. Interesting thing about my experience there, you know, the nurses, the staff too, have badges and buttons. And one button that they wear is Cura Personalis, which is one of our hallmarks, you know. care of the person, care of the whole person, which we say. And I would go around asking nurses, especially because they're frontline for us, you see them so often. Could you tell me what your button means? Could you tell me what that cura personalis means? And you get a variety of different answers. And so it was fun for me to kind of dig into our spirituality from their perspective. Why do you wear that button, and why is this meaningful to you here? Yeah. So from there, from that experience, and then the welcome of the Jesuit community here, it was just such a wonderful experience during that time to be living and working and getting to know guys like John O'Malley, who you've had on here, and the wonderful Howard Gray, who was in your office there, I guess, right before you, and as I said, Joe Lingen, but just a wealth of history and great stories from the Jesuits who have devoted their lives to Georgetown, really. And so the invitation came from Howard and from Joe Lingen that there was this job, Director of Ignatian Programs, and if I was interested, that I should, give it some thought. And it was a wonderful discernment for me, because I was in a place of freedom, really. And I can talk about that a little bit later when we talk about Ignatian spirituality, but I was in a place of freedom where I was saying, Lord, whatever you have for me, I'm open to doing. Whatever challenges you set before me, I'm ready to dive in. And so I went back to Portland, Oregon. I talked with my provincial, and he said, well, what are we thinking of next? And I said, well, I got this job opportunity at Georgetown, and I said, I'd like to pursue that. He said, well, okay. He said, I'd like you to go and look at a couple of high schools, because I had been in campus ministry, as you said, for about 8-10 years. And he says, I think I'd like you to look at a couple of these other high schools. Well, as it would have it, my heart really wasn't tugging towards high school ministry again. I had done that. And also, too, I found it, the more this job opportunity at Georgetown, the more this opportunity at Georgetown really kind of played in my imagination and in my prayer and in my thought, I found myself really pushing towards Georgetown. And as it played out, my provincial said, it sounds like we need to pursue this, so go ahead and interview and go through the process. And here I am, almost like you say, 5 years later, and I'm still doing this. It's been wonderful. It really has.
We certainly feel very grateful that you're part of it. And a lot of universities don't have such a prestigious kind of like, at least, claim to having a director of Ignatian Programs that kind of walks alongside campus ministry, walks alongside some of the other ministries we do. And you do a lot for our students, our faculty, our staff, and our alumni actually in this role. So let's just take apart a bit all that you do. When I had to ask Father Jerry, I had to ask you, what do you do? And I was amazed at all the different ways that you engage the university community, whether here or alumni. So you have the spiritual exercises that you give to faculty, staff, and students. Yeah. You have Jesuit Heritage Month every November to plan. Yeah. You collaborate with faculty on the Engelhard Project, which is this integration of student well-being into courses in academic context. And you do a lot of retreat and spiritual direction, accompanying countless numbers of students and staff and faculty on their spiritual journey. So first off, let's just talk about the spiritual exercises, especially the 19th annotation program that we have here. I'm so impressed, I have to say, in my third year, finished my third year, how many faculty and staff here at Georgetown have done a version of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about the success of the program and what it's about and that?
Yeah, and I inherited this, coming in only 5 years ago. This has been going on for, I think, close to 16 years that we've been offering this in a variety of formats. Because I think historically, if somebody learned about our spiritual exercises, our way of praying, our way of being, designed and created by St. Ignatius, our founder, I think there's a variety of ways that you can approach it, and I think it's wonderful that they're so accessible to people in all walks of life. So we have busy schedules. Can I do a half hour, 45 minutes of prayer every day in my regular routine? Am I willing to commit? Do I have openness? Is one of the desires, one of the dispositions we say. Are you open to give yourself over to this time, but also to whatever the grace is that comes from a daily commitment to praying?
Yeah.
And so the exercises are in this format, what we call the spiritual exercises in everyday life here, or spiritual exercises in ordinary time. We begin in September and we go through May. We have dinner once a month, and we present on different themes on the spiritual exercises. We walk with people and direct them weekly. I have a great slate of directors who have been trained in the spiritual exercises and leading the spiritual exercises. A number of Jesuits, but a wonderful cohort, a wonderful grouping of lay colleagues here who just desire to continue supporting my programs. And so, yes, we get 10 to 15 a year devoted to the program. I would say, when you set yourself out on this course, it's a big commitment. And some might not make it all the way through, and that's okay, because they got what they needed out of it. And in a few years, I'll revisit and see if they're ready to continue. So, I think everything that I do begins and ends with the spiritual exercises. And there are many roads that lead into the experience, the 9-month experience of the spiritual exercises.
Right. Wow. Yeah. How many? Over 200 faculty and staff, right? I think it's have done it.
And I would say in the formal sense that we do it, beginning in September, ending in May. But there are so many others who have told me, who are not on my list, who say, oh, I did that with Howard Gray one-on-one in his office. I did that with Father so-and-so, and it took me 2 years, but I did the exercises. So there's a whole other list of people who have committed themselves.
That's great. That's great. Hey, so what do you think draws faculty and staff and alumni to Ignatian Spirituality? I mean, what do they often tell you about it? What are the, to use that great Jesuit theological word, what are the graces that seem to come out of it? It's a unique kind of way of thinking about your relationship with God and the world and the people you love. And how would you put it? What are your own thoughts about that? How would you say Ignatian Spirituality is a kind of, it draws something out of people?
Yeah, I would go backwards, and I would say, because I just had a group that ended, in May, and some of them were telling me, it's really hard to name what this was like right now.
Mm-hmm.
A year from now, 2 years from now, I think they'll be able to say and see where God was really leading them. God is really the spiritual director in the exercises, we say. But then they want to revisit some of those experiences, some of those graces later on. And so I think that people who have our colleagues, our faculty, our staff who have done the exercises, I think word of mouth, by them talking about it, then they come to me and they say, hey, I've heard about this. And so it's a lot of it is word of mouth, but also too, somebody said that they watched their colleague change over the course of the year.
Wow.
And so they wanted to know, what can they do to have a similar experience?
Yeah.
And so then we have that conversation. But as you know, I encounter so many people, and I'm invited into so many different intimate conversations, and it's fielding those desires from folks and saying, you know what, why don't we start with this book? Why don't we start with this short little reading, and then let's talk about it. And then we see, okay, if this is where God is leading you right now, then let's continue into the formal structure of the exercises. I have folks who come by for spiritual direction here, though, that they admit they're not ready for the formal commitment yet. But they're so happy just being able to talk about their prayer life once a month and seeing where this is going. And it's hard to talk about our faith. It's hard to talk about what we believe in today.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say certainly not in the word, but even in an academic setting, you don't speak of that. Although I think being a Jesuit university, we have the opportunity to invite people in, and I've just been so grateful to see how many people like see this as an invitation, see this as a way to grow deeper spiritually, more connected and more committed to the people they love and to the world that they love, and really I think into Georgetown, which has been great.
I think people are surprised by what happens over the course of the year.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I also think there's something open about it. As you know, Jerry, I did the 19th annotations with a Jewish professor who taught Jewish medieval studies, and I said, I really want to do this as a very faithful Jewish woman, and she says, I want to. I've been working now at a Jesuit university. I want to understand, and I want to see if God will speak to me. And I think it was a more powerful experience for me accompanying her, because I learned so much about her experience, her Jewish imagination, her Jewish kind of acumen with texts and that kind of knowledge. And I've also done it with people who are what you might call, secular as well. People who they have a spark of something, but they're not sure they really are religious. So, if you had that same experience as well?
I do, yeah. And I think as you were talking, I think St. Ignatius would be really happy with us in the way we've made the spiritual exercises so accessible to so many different people of different walks of life. And here at Georgetown, because we have such a diversity of religions, because we have such a diversity of faith and traditions, whether we are a praying person or not, the exercises can fit in a small way in your life. And so yes, folks come and they discover along the way that, hey, there is something here for me, something a little bit more for me. They don't just shut the door on it and they say, no, that's not for me, but they leave it open. There's that sense of openness to, there's something more here.
Yeah, the more than modest. So, okay, if you had to kind of give 2 or 3 like words that say are, concepts, what do you think is fundamental to Ignatian spirituality, to the process or to the goal, to what is fundamental? And maybe a second question, now that we have a Jesuit Pope who is so steeped in Jesuit spirituality, do you see that even reflected in the way the papacy is evolving under Pope Francis? So the first question though, what would be those fundamental questions? I think I have mine and every Jesuit has their own, but how do you see it?
As I looked at this question, Mark, I was saying to myself, what happens to me and what happens to us at the end of the day is this great bond or this great sense of community that the exercises provide in this structure. But also there's this sense of belonging. And when we find ourselves belonging to that community, there's this drive to give back, or there's this drive to give more, magis. What can I do more in my time here, or in my life right now? And so I think that leads to generosity. There's a great generosity of spirit that we're tapping into that people don't even know they have. That there's more magis, there's more that they could be giving, and generosity is something that we pray with, I hope, every day. We acknowledge and examine that we are truly gifted and loved by God, and there is this drive to give back. How can I then nourish someone else with what I've been blessed with?
Yeah, I think what really resonates with me, I think the 2 things that I think of when I think about why this is such an attractive spiritual practice is it's about spiritual freedom, because we all think we're free, but we have a lot of things that bind us. And so how do I become a more free human being, free to love, free to forgive, free to say yes, as you say, to be more generous? And it's about, I think for me, I guess, what I keep on hearing is this, I can be made more free. And the other thing is, like you said, it's about, I've already been, I know I'm a sinner, and yet I know I'm loved by God.
Yeah.
So it's like you're not trying to idealize yourself when you go through the spiritual exercises. You actually kind of interrogate your own sinfulness and still feel God's love through this prayer. Do you have that same experience, or do you have other ways of saying it?
Yeah, well, we begin with that sense of sin, that sense of, I think with regard to sin, I think we tend to walk around with a great deal of shame and guilt in our lives.
Yeah.
And I notice that in our students, because there's a lot of walking around, not only are our heads down, we're not looking eye to eye with one another. We're not in union or harmony with one another. And the more we can get people to lift their heads up and to look where they're going and to look at the people they encounter, the more we see, oh, hey, I belong to something else here.
Yeah.
That's when my examen comes to life. You know, my daily prayer is like, who did I encounter? Where was God speaking to me, and through whom? Was it through the way the sun was hitting the leaves, or was it through a brief exchange or a hello from somebody? And so I can only see that if my eyes and my head are lifted up. But I think we walk around with some shame, because shame and guilt cause us to look down.
That's really powerful, because I think sometimes the word sin is maybe not really the most helpful. It's more brokenness, a sense of unfinishness about our lives, and that we kind of enter into without that sense of shame and guilt. I think we can all admit that there's a brokenness to so much of who we are, who we want to become, our world around us, and it's less that. I think Ignatian Spirituality allows us just to say, okay, I'm part of that. I'm part of the web of brokenness in the world. Yeah,
Exactly.
So what about Pope Francis? What do you think is what do you think coming out?
Yeah, so you know, I saw a picture recently again of Francis, you know, and I don't know if this is true, but people like to create funny stories around Pope Francis. But somebody said, you know, Pope Francis sneaks out in the middle of the night in plain clothes, which I know wouldn't be possible, and serves the poor in Rome. You know, that he goes out, he works in soup kitchens, and that he does this. And I'm glad for that little fantasy or that little story, because he's calling us really, when you see him washing the feet of prisoners, when you see him opening up spaces that were reserved for, that were museums, opening these places up as shelters and places to bathe those who are left alone, left on the street. He's calling us really to look out for the needs of the poor that we perhaps don't see because our eyes are down to the ground. And so he's calling us to a greater responsibility to the community, to the world in which we live in. This whole idea and concept of care for our creation is just, there are so many facets to that we're continuing to learn about, and I applaud him for leading us in this direction.
And it kind of goes to that Ignatian dictum, right? Love is shown in deeds more than words, and he's actually going out performing that for us, so that we see his connection to the poor. Yeah, I would say that. And the other word that I think that no other pope has ever used so much is discernment, right? We are a more discerning church now, I think. We were always been a discerning church, but we're cognizant of that word as a theological or spiritual place to figure out what's the greater good, what's the deeper moment of justice, where do we go for reconciliation? Those are all discerning things, and he uses that word a lot, and he asks us Jesuits when he comes to talk to us, be a discerning apostolic community, just discern the needs. So yeah, I see it both in those two things.
Yeah, he's holding us accountable.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, so let's move a little. You do a lot of Ignatian retreats, by the way. You know, you run them for students. We talked about the faculty and staff. We've even done some from alumni. But can you just give a sense what is offered at Georgetown now? Can you kind of, we have this kind of retreat, this kind of retreat, this kind of retreat?
Yeah, so I said everything kind of dovetails in and out of the spiritual exercises that we've been talking about. And so, we're blessed that we have the Calganini Contemplative Center, that Arthur and Nancy were so kind and gracious to give us. But I offer a couple of weekend retreats, which, before pandemic, I was hoping to increase, to 4 weekends instead of 2. So we'll see, looking ahead, whatever this offers, but it's just a real quick survey. You can do a lot in silence on a Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. And just giving them some concepts of discernment, giving them concepts of what does it mean to be generous, to be more open to God's grace in your life. And so I have a weekend silent retreat that I do, Ignatian Retreat. We run a prayer and daily life, what we call a prayer and daily life retreat. Other places call it a busy person's retreat. Might be familiar with that term, which essentially is allowing a person to walk with a spiritual director for 5 days. Let's see if this is something that helps you bring some flesh or some light to your prayer.
And that's open to that's open to alumni, to faculty, to students. I've seen the group. It kind of is, you're kind of surprised to see students and faculty and alumni out for 5 days, on retreat at the Calganini Center, or since we've been doing it virtually, online and Zoom. But that's pretty impressive, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, but it pulls folks out of their busy life, and it says, hey, come meet with me for a half an hour, and then go back to your regularly scheduled programming, and let's see how this changes or has an effect on your daily life.
Yeah.
So that's prayer and daily life. Then after the exercises, after folks have spent 9 months with us in this, we have what's called the living the Ignatian charism, because the challenge at the end of the exercises is to now go live and bask really in God's love for you. And so I have a group of faculty, that get invited it's basically a book club, but we're always trying to focus on some sort of text that leads us into a discussion around Ignatian spirituality, and that meets monthly, and we have snacks and maybe some wine offered.
Maybe.
Maybe. But that's has been a really rewarding opportunity for me to get to know faculty, to get to know the history of Georgetown and the spiritual exercises, because those folks who are coming to that group have been a part of Ignatian programming for 16, 18 years, and maybe even beyond, as they interacted with Jesuits on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions, and maybe we'll just take one quick one because I think we can answer it. And it says, are these retreats open to, these Ignatian silent retreats open to alumni? And the answer is yes, right? So we have to do a better job, I think, with our alumni to say these 5-day retreats are very much something that we need to get out there, because it is a mix of alumni, faculty, and students. So good. So let's switch a little. Okay, please. Yeah, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, yes, on our weekend Ignatian retreat, students, faculty, and alumni are present on those retreats, which is good for our students, I think, to hear when we do faith sharing in the evening, to hear alumni talk about their life and what silence and prayer mean to them. And same thing with the faculty, who are brave enough to share and expose a little bit of that, inner self with our students.
Yeah,
very important.
Wonderful stuff. I want to switch gears a little bit, because you're also in charge, kind of as a manager and a programmer for Jesuit Heritage Month each November. And as you know, Father Jerry, we had a Jesuit Heritage Week, and we moved it to a month because we thought, we really need to kind of ponder and do a little bit more event planning around aspects of what it means to be a Jesuit school. Georgetown is a Jesuit school, the first, obviously, in the nation. So what is that November? Why November, and why do you think it's important for us to carry out this vision of education, which we celebrate each year?
Yeah, good. And thank you for increasing my workload from a week to a month with Ignatian Jesuit Heritage. what we found with a week, just to explain, what we found with a week, that there was so much programming that we were trying to put into a week of events that it was just so it was too much, that we needed to pace it out. Yeah. And so over the course of a month, which really is 3 weeks in November because we have Thanksgiving in there. But November is significant because there are several different either memories or feasts or significant days there for us as Jesuits. And we have the Feast of All Saints on November 1st, but a lot of people don't know that the feast on November 5th is the Feast of All Jesuit Saints, where we celebrate all of our wonderful saints in the church. In the order. But also too, on November 16th, we remember that the Uca martyrs, the Jesuits who were killed down in El Salvador, and that took the theme last November for us in terms of our speakers and in terms of our programming, because it was the 30th anniversary of those Jesuits who were killed down there. And so it's an opportunity really to take pieces of our story, of our history, and to bring them up into our current consciousness. And so this year, our planning is still kind of up in the air, but we were thinking of let's take Pope Francis's Laudato Si and let's put flesh on this in our programming for November. So I'm still, fingers crossed, hoping that we can do something that people can dial into from abroad, but also to, if there's a presence here, that we can celebrate Jesuit Heritage Month in a way that calls us to be more conscious of our environment and being more sustainable. Yeah.
One of the things I love about Jesuit Heritage Month is you gather the whole community at one Mass up in Gaston Hall. It's really nice to have Mass up there, really kind of highlighting our Jesuit, roots here at Georgetown. And I know President DeGioia always says a few words at that Mass. And so it's always at the beginning of November, and it's really it's a profound way to kind of to remind us where we come from and all the resources, really, there's some deep resources in 400, 500 years of Jesuit education.
True. There's a rich history. I mean, not only here at Georgetown, but within our society from throughout the world. And the more we can tell those stories, it's a way of catching our students up. I think the history of Jesuit Heritage Week and now month was that our students were leaving without really engaging with the Jesuit community. And so we wanted more opportunities for them to sit down. We have something called a fireside chat, where you just sit down and you listen to a Jesuit tell his maybe vocation story, maybe some interesting characteristics about their life, and then time for questions and answers. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for our students to engage in so many different ways with what's meaningful and what's important to us. As the Society of Jesus.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's been really great, great programming. We're really blessed to have this month. I've been impressed also by how many faculty you do know and work with you. I'm always running into someone that says, "Oh, Father Jerry came into my class." It was usually in health sciences or something, or "Father Jerry's so great with my students." I'm like, "Well, where was he?" So I know that I know how deeply embedded you are in Georgetown, even though you're kind of you're all doing it kind of like on your own plan, right? Because you don't really have a large program of people. But I think from what I understand, you do most of your collaboration with the Engelhardt Project on student well-being. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, about how you collaborate with those faculty and the lunches and different gatherings?
So when before you got here, there was a conversation or a series of conversations that were being held with Howard Gray and Joan Riley, Mindy McWilliams, and Kathy McGuire-Zeiss, and how do we engage with our faculty just a little bit more and the mission. And through a series of articles, it was around that time that Howard wrote the article called Envisioning Sanctuary. I forget the full title of it. But we use that kind of as a basis for our faculty to discuss how is it that you bring the mission into, how is it that you bring a more reflective kind of tone to your students in the classroom, or is this possible? And so now we've had, 6 opportunities or 6 semesters of this where we gather around a dining room table, whether it's at lunch or dinner. We share a few stories about what's going on in our lives. We, again, build community with one another, and it's a cross section throughout the university of faculty from all around, and they're talking about, how does the mission engage, or how does the mission come to some sort of life in your classroom, or how can it? And so we use James Martin's book a little bit, everything you didn't want to know about Jesuits, but were afraid to ask, or something along those lines. Because there are some great chapters in there. He makes our spirituality so accessible. And so we don't use the whole book per se, but we give them the book and say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're all about. And the one thing that I would say a big thing that they take away is, how can I use the examine, the awareness prayer that we do on a daily basis, to be more reflective and more aware in my classroom?
Yeah.
And if that's all we do, we've got a great entree into bringing the mission into the classroom with faculty. There's so much more to it, but I've been inviting folks personally now for the last 3 years, and I would say, the way that I engage with faculty, I think it's just a series of yeses, because you have a conversation and then it leads to, would you come into my class and talk about X? Would you come in and just be on a panel? Would you come in and tell us your story? I mean, I'm here for that.
That's great. Yeah. One of the great things you've done since coming to Georgetown is to serve as chaplain for our Magis Immersion Lourdes trip for our nursing and health science students. Spending almost 2 weeks with them at the Shrine of Lourdes, the baths, with the Malades. I think we call it the spirituality of healthcare, right? That's the kind of the framework of it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about this trip, and how have students and faculty at NHS responded?
Yeah. There's a real eagerness. I was just sharing Lourdes, the story of Lourdes with somebody else, and they said, well, tell me when I can go, and well, you got to be either a nursing student or part of NHS. But there's a desire. I mean, maybe we do another trip, for non-nursing folks. But NHS, I remember talking to the nursing students early on when we were going, and as somebody who worked in the hospital and who's very I appreciate and value pastoral care. I was talking to them to the nurses about looking into the eyes of those you are going to be serving. And so I think the biggest transformation that takes place is that they are able, the students learn to pray with folks who are coming into the baths, who have tremendous faith, who have a desire to be healed. And then your job there basically is just to care for them for a very short time. And it's difficult, it's hard work. And they come back and they're a little bit tired. But we feed them well while we're there. But there is this spirit in Lourdes, as you know, that kind of takes over. Yeah. And your life is going through. So the miracle of healing that takes place, I think, is in each one of us. It's spiritual. It's deeper. And so there's a physical healing, but there's also a spiritual healing that takes place. And so to watch these students and their eyes just get bigger and bigger as they talk about the people who touch their lives. And then I said, and when you're talking about the lives the lives that have touched your life, you've equally touched so many more lives. And so for them, it changes their outlook as they move into the nursing profession in a short amount of time, in a year or two. And so that for me is just such a privilege to watch them reflect over that 10 days or whatever amount of time, reflect on the experience in such a way that this is what I'm bringing to my work when I graduate and when I get hired as a nursing professional.
Yeah.
They don't know when they sign up for it, they don't know what they're in for, and it's wonderful to see their eyes just get bigger and bigger as the days progress.
That's great.
It's a gift. It's really a gift.
Thank you, and thanks for doing that. I want to now turn to kind of the theme of this is, about how do we deal with Ignatian, how does Ignatian spirituality help us in this present moment? We've been living with the pandemic now since early March. I know it affected your Magis immersion trip to the Dominican Republic with students, as well as the Lord's trip that was canceled this summer. And all of your work, all of our work has either been postponed or transferred over to the virtual programming. It's been tough, and you've heard this from a lot of students and faculty and alumni. It's tough on our students, our parents, our alumni, on everyone. If you were to offer advice to those who are restless or disappointed, especially students who won't be coming back to campus, or just those you feel at a loss during this time, what would the advice be? Are there any ways that Ignatian spirituality can help ground us as people of God, as people of hope?
Well, as you know, Ignatian spirituality really is focused on feelings and the whole notion of what am I feeling when I pray, when I contemplate, when I imagine my life based on these exercises or on these scripture passages that I'm using here. And so I think feelings are very important, and I encouraged the students that I was engaging with as things were kind of falling apart in March to pay attention to their feelings. What are you feeling right now? And acknowledge it and be able to move on. I mean, there was a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there was a lot of loneliness. Is when they started unraveling this, it was like it was either loneliness or it was a fear of really being alone. And as you know now, I mean, those feelings are very pronounced in our day-to-day existence. I get so excited when I see somebody who comes into the office to grab papers these days, because I haven't seen a human being on this campus in a while, other than construction workers. But I think paying attention to our feelings, and then when we're feeling that disconnected or that disconnect, it's so important to reach out. It's so important to call. It's so important to talk, and to understand that I am not. We're all doing this together, and that sense of community that we build here is still going on, even though we're not physically present to one another. And so I was sharing that with them as they move through, and I know nothing can take away from the sense of loss that they were experiencing as they started thinking about all the things that didn't happen. And if we live in that where it didn't happen, it really can bring us down. So let's look at what is happening and what are we able to accomplish on a day-to-day basis. One thing that stood out for me was my assistant was able to connect with me at 9 o'clock in the morning when she was at home and I was here. And I think that accountability to one another, really, in the work that we were trying to accomplish still, was so important. And so I think being accountable to your roommates, or being accountable to your cohort in NHS or wherever your studies take you, but I think holding on to that connection. And really looking at what am I able to do here? What am I accomplishing instead of not accomplishing? And the other thing that I told them to do is to push away from all of the news alerts. Turn off your phone, because it really could drag you down. It was dragging us down. Those almost every 5 minutes there was another alert or another disappointment.
Yeah. I think, I was thinking about in my own experience as a Jesuit, and with the spirituality kind of, shaping and forming my life. the two things that most seem to have helped me is tweaking my examen a bit to say, to honor the fact that life is different, that I feel this loss, and to give it up to God and say, I'm going to give up this sense of the normal for you, God, today, because this is how it is. But also, like you said, the word feelings, feeling what's not normal that I have to just, what are the normal things that I just have to give up to God? I think that's been really profound. So I find that the examen has been an interesting, a positive way for Ignatian spirituality in my own life during this time. It really, in a remarkable way, because I mean, I've been doing the examen for 30 years, and
Yeah.
there's a newness to it because of the situation, that mindfulness of where we are, mindfulness that I trust in God, and there must have to give back up to God what I can't control, the mysteries of this pandemic, the mysteries of our world.
Right.
And I think the other thing that has been really, I think, important about Ignatian spirituality is the fact that Ignatius talks about the dark spirits, right, and the light spirits, or the light and the dark. And this is a time when we can go right to the darkness.
Yeah.
And Ignatius would say, don't go there. Put a lid on it, and
Yeah.
tell yourself that, and as kind of a divine fiat, don't go to the dark places. Stop.
Yeah.
Doing that. Have you found that yourself?
Yeah, Agere Contra. Remember that? Remember
Yeah,
learning that?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you feel, when your prayer or when your feelings and your imagination is not leading you into the light, push back against it. Agere Contra. Go against.
Right.
Say, no, I'm not going to enter in. I'm not going to entertain that feeling right now. I'm going to do the opposite.
Yeah. I was talking to a student on Zoom a couple days ago, and he's very disappointed that he doesn't get to come back to campus because he's not going to be one of those 2,000. And he said kind of the same thing. He says, I know that I can't go there because if I live there, I'll just be cynical and upset and surprised. And really, that's exactly what I think Ignatius would say, is that go where you can be free, not where you're going to be all upset and kind of like tortured by the realities of our life.
Yeah. Mark, I think we have our work cut out for us as they return, as they come back, as we don't want them to live in that bitterness or the feelings of left out or the limited capacity that we have, and we need to help them moving forward. We need to help them see joy in their life every day. I think our task is in front of us is big.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think making sure that especially our freshmen, but all the students who come back, and those who are going to still be online, that we're going to be talking to, we're going to be doing retreats virtually with, that we're going to invite into Christian communities for Bible reflection, that we have to make sure that they're not separated, that we're still that one community, and that this adventure in Jesuit higher ed is maybe little tweaks for some students, but we're really doing the same thing.
Right. It'll be a little different.
Yeah. Well, let's go to questions then. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So one of the questions I think we kind of answered is, are retreats open for alumni and parents? And yeah, so that's an easy one for us to answer. We do have to do a better job of getting the word out, I think. But in many ways, we have been at, like, the virtual retreat that you just did was at capacity. Oh my, 20 something.
We had to do an extra one because we couldn't handle all the requests, so we opened up another one. And I think in that we discovered that we can do this in a virtual setting such as this, but we can do more. I mean, you talk about modules. Now I'm like, can we do this every month?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you have such a group of lay collaborators who are truly inspired and in love with the spiritual exercises, because I was so grateful that you invited me to be part of that, finding that we had more time now in this role. But I know I had an alum and a faculty member as the two that I directed, and I knew that there were lots of staff and faculty as well. Yeah. Interesting question. Could you give your interpretation, Father Hayes, of the daily examen and the general examen, and how we we kind of do them on a daily basis. Even if you haven't done the spiritual exercises, I guess, how could the examen kind of ground somebody today? Can you say a little bit more about what this daily examen is about?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think the examen, when in the spiritual exercises in the spiritual life, Ignatius says when our prayer runs dry in the exercises, and it does happen, make sure that you're still attentive to the examen. And so really what you're doing is looking for, when it was first given to me when I was a novice, when it was first shared with me, I begin with a stance, a quiet meditation stance of entering into gratitude, entering into the beauty that I see around me. And it's always easy. That first step is always easy for folks to dive into. And the next step is to ask the Holy Spirit, ask God's Spirit to show you what I need to see right now. And so what is it that I missed? What is it that I need to pay particular attention to in a bracket of time? So we do the examen at noon and we do it before we go to bed. And so there's a bracket of time from the time I wake up until noon, let's say, or 1 o'clock. And I'm looking at hour by hour by hour my interactions and where was I and where did I find God's Spirit most pronounced? Because we believe, that God is trying to engage with us on a daily basis in so many different ways and through so many different voices. And so once we have that, we spend a little bit of time on that area that the Spirit is asking us to shed light on. Spend a little bit of time on that period and to dialogue. Where was my heart? Where was the Spirit leading me? Did I cooperate with the Spirit, or did I go against the Spirit? No, not right now, God. So many times I find myself saying, I'll get to you later. And God says, now is later. And then moving ahead into the last two, it's resolution. It's like, I'm going to do better. I'm going to engage with you more. And then Ignatius says, with great joy, we embrace our day again. And it's just a quick 10-minute prayer that we go through these steps. We spend a couple of minutes with each of these ideas. But what I find in my own examen is that I miss, as I was saying earlier, I look for those missed encounters. And sometimes people are engaging with us and they bring a voice that I think is God's voice, within one another. And so the examen for me is just helping me pay attention to what's going on in my daily life and to be attentive to it, because it's one thing to have that awareness and then I respond. I have to respond to the awareness. Right. How does God ask me to respond?
Yeah, I like how you put it, that in many ways the examen is a prayer of paying attention, of you doing some work, like going through your day, what's going on, but really allowing God really just to kind of bless that moment of reflection and that moment of examination of your life, and to remind yourselves that you're not the master of your own life, that God's mysterious love is going to holding you up at the end of the day. Yeah. Wow. So, there, a lot of people want to know, what should you read? I know, so if you had your top 4 or 5, what would you suggest our viewers, what would be some good books for them to kind of look at if they wanted to get deeper in Ignatian spirituality?
One that stands out for me that we read over the last year, and I give this to a number of folks who are looking for an entree, is our dear brother Mark Thibodeau's book, God's Voice Within. This is a good, it's a real good entree into our meditation, contemplative prayer experience. Mark was a novice master training young Jesuits in the spiritual exercises, and this comes from that
wisdom,
that place in his life. It's the Ignatian. He says it's the Ignatian way to discover God's will, which I love. It's like, what's God's will for me? What's God's will for creation? It's a good text. Another one that I just discovered, if you're interested in meditation, you know, we have the John Main Center here on campus, and it's a wonderful quiet spot right outside my office, actually. But the if this is called the Way of Unknowing, and I take this, you know, only two pages at a time, really, to kind of understand the complexities of meditation. And John Main and others have said, you know, we just need to spend, you know, 20 minutes really quietly, you know, whether it's the beginning of our day or whether it's at the end of our day, but we really need to spend 20 to 30 minutes just really quietly breathing in, breathing out. And the word gratitude is what I always just meditate with, in the ways in which I'm grateful. And so that's one that I've been diving into here. You know, the Ignatian Adventure, which so many people know Kevin O'Brien wrote. This is his spiritual exercises for folks in their daily life. It's not a book to read necessarily, but it's a book to walk with someone else and to talk to a spiritual director or a best friend, you know, really about what you're experiencing. And it's not, you know, I read it all the way through. I read the whole book. It's read it a page at a time and spend some time meditating and praying with it. What do you have? What are you reading? Or what do you?
Well, I've been reading some spiritual work. I just came back from retreat. I was reading these short books by the Anglican Archbishop Rowan Williams on discipleship and on prayer. They're very short things that he gave at Canterbury Cathedral back in the early 2000s. And I found them very, very helpful. They reminded me that prayer is both me personally with God, but also me with a community. That one can't really be with God alone without that premise or the assumption that you're part of a larger human family, right? That you do this as a community. So that has been really helpful for me. I have to say, in terms of just Ignatian spirituality, I've always loved the work of Father David Fleming. He helped bring me into the Society of Jesus, and was the first person who really just sat me down to kind of say what this is about, this spirituality is about. And so his books are being published by Loyola Press, even though he's passed away. He was a good friend of Howard Gray's. Two of the great giants are gone. It's just so sad. And yet there's so many people like Thibodeau and others that you've mentioned, James Martin, who really carry on this next generation of how do we talk and speak and help people find themselves, find their freedom, find their generous hearts, you know, so definitely.
You and I are both connected by David Fleming as well, not just when we met 18 years ago, but we both have David Fleming stories. And I think one of his greatest gifts was that he reinterpreted the spiritual exercises. You know, he took Ignatius's raw text, and then Dave Fleming gave us more meat really to use. And that's the book. Fleming is the book that I used when I first did the spiritual exercises. And I continue to draw from his words, and it's a wonderful text. So anything you can get by Fleming is gold. Yeah.
I'll make sure by the end of this that we send out an email with some 5 or 6, 7 text references that people could get easily online. Some of the Fleming stuff has been cut into little pieces on a Loyola Press, daily kind of examen as well. But Father Fleming was important because he was the first person to tell me that I'm a kinesthetic person. I have to be walking. I can't just sit down and say the rosary. I have to walk the rosary. And he's like, well, what's wrong with that? I'm like, well, no, I'm not supposed to be like in the seat and have it all dark and quiet with the candle. He said, no. And you just needed the permission with someone to say that. He just really helped me understand that there are ways of praying Ignatian that are not just kind of like a stereotype,
Sometimes my best examens are when I walk around Healy and I go from outside my office and right back to the door. And the best examen is when I'm walking around the front steps there. And it's just thank you, God. And I can get on with my day.
There's nothing better than when you see the students you know, there on Healy Lawn, or you see, you know, it's a great, it plops you down. So
Yeah.
well, listen, Father Jerry Hayes, it's now time to end our conversation. We are going to we're going to make sure that the email gets put up. You're going to give me those collection of books that you just mentioned. I'll give a few of mine. We'll offer this as a kind of a summer to stay involved and stay engaged with reading in our Jesuit heritage. I want to thank you for all you do, and I want to thank all of our viewers for listening into these conversations. We've just tried to introduce more and more of our alumni and families, and parents and students to the Jesuit community and the work they do here amongst our students. Again, enlivening that Ignatian heritage that so many people truly love here and have taken it on as their own. We're going to take a break for the rest of the summer because it's vacation time, and we know that a lot of people are away. But we hope to come back in the fall, and if maybe not, maybe once a month, do the same thing and continue the conversation so that we can stay connected. Because I think the pandemic's still going to be going strong, and sadly, I want you to know. Would you want to say something, Father Jerry?
No.
Okay. I was going to say, I want you to know that I want our viewers to know that the Jesuit community really does keep you in our prayers at Mass. We keep our alumni, our faculty, our students in our thoughts and minds. We ask the Lord to protect you and to watch over you, and we hope to be together as much as we can in the future. So thank you very much for being part of this, Jerry. We really appreciate it. And
great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to everybody for being part of it. We're going to sign off now, and stay tuned. We'll be back in September. Bye now.